Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy for the offseason. That's right. Offseason boy. That's my new name. Jonathan Macri with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. Welcome to the beginning of the rest of our lives. First, let me introduce my esteemed co-host, Jeremy Cohen. Jeremy, hello, sir.
Hello, John. How was the game last night?
He's going to come right out and ask it.
Well, you were there.
I was there. I don't want to step on our pod. So we actually have so first of all, credit to Jeremy. He thought of the topic for today's, or the structure, I should say, for today's pod. It's a good one. I don't want to step on anything that we're going to be talking about. So I will just say now that I was happy I got to go to a playoff game. I've never heard the Garden as loud as I did, but I'm sure that was the same experience for you in game. I'm sure anybody who was in any of these games probably could say I've never heard the Garden as loud as
it was loud. Yes.
It was loud. And I will also just say that there were some challenging moments, and I will leave it at that for now. And we will revisit perhaps one of those challenging moments as we continue to talk today. So we're recording this on I don't even lost track of days, on Thursday. This is Thursday after the Knicks season has ended. You know, there's a lot of emotions flying through the air. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things being said. There's a lot of headlines being written by people who are paid to do such things. I have I have not spent a lot of time on social media today, but I still am on notifications for all of the beat writers. And let me tell you, there were a couple moments where I picked up my phone after it vibrated and I wanted to throw that fucking thing across the room. I didn't do it, though. No, we're not naming any names here, by the way. So Jeremy had a great idea for this pod. I almost want to let you, do you want to pitch the idea? Because it's a good one.
Yeah, you know, I was looking at this team and it was the sort of thing where I knew the end would eventually arrive for the Knicks. It's just they weren't built for the postseason to this extent, and that's totally fine. But I had this thought process of, you know, this podcast is very therapeutic for me in a lot of ways. And I know that we have a lot of listeners who feel similarly. And I knew that I was going to feel something. I didn't think I would feel quite as bad after Game 5 as I did. Because my whole mindset, as you know, John, for this whole year has just been house money. And after Game 4, I thought, you know, like, even if the Knicks lose one of the next 3 games, I can live with it. That's fine. I'll get over it easy. And, you know, they weren't supposed to be here. It's great. All that stuff. And I just felt empty and sad and disappointed. And I know that all of these good things happened, but I walked away feeling like, really, it's come to this. This is, man, I haven't felt this way in a while, at least not for anything that's ping pong ball related or draft focused or maybe free agency, but about actual in-season feelings. I hadn't had this in a while. And I tried my best to kind of actually compartmentalize a lot of it. So when we talk about it, we could break it down. But I thought, even though I'm not necessarily grieving, I felt, why don't we go over the 5 stages of grief for this season and try to find some catharsis from this point of, I still feel like crap because the team that I've been following for months on end just did not succeed in the end. And getting to the point where we can process it and say, you know what, this was a great season. I'm really happy with the product that we've got and moving forward and how excited I'm at. But I'm not there yet. I know that by the end of the conversation, we'll be on the right track.
We're going to get there. I want to say a couple caveats. One, neither myself or Jeremy, I don't think at least, are clinically licensed psychotherapists. 2, I love this idea that you came up with because it hit me honestly just a little while before we started recording. I forgot what it was like to process a playoff loss in this way, because obviously I've, you know, as anybody who's listened to this knows, I've been a fan since, you know, the mid 90s. And there have been the Marbury, you know, playoff series against Kidd and the Nets in the early 2000s, but then the 3 in a row. But those were very different for different reasons. And we don't need to get into it now, but I remember very distinctly, other than 12-13, and 12-13 was very unique because I had just met the woman who I knew I had like, it was funny. I was realizing at the time that they were going into those playoffs that I was going to marry this person. And so as disappointed as I was that ended, I was like, it was tough for me to be like, that said, now I'm old and married and have 2 kids. So it's easier to lend yourself a little bit over to your sports fandom, as it were. So let's get started. I think that's a good place to kick it off. So denial is the first stage, right? I've thought about this one for a little while. And I think there's only one place to start for me here, which is that I'm kind of in denial about the fact that anything that we said over the course of the season in terms of long-term ramifications of this year and the positive long-term effects of this year might not be true. We've spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about how this year, everything that went on this year was a setup for things to come, and that it like all of the important stuff was in like the good because of all the good that was happening, and it's just going to be like the gravy train is going to keep moving. And there's a lot of conversation about how now I don't, maybe that's not the case. I don't want to accept that. I just want the good vibes to continue. And I just don't want to be faced with being upset about anything. So I'm in denial about that. Where are you at?
Yeah. Part of it is the season as a whole. As we've said, I still can't really believe it that everything has kind of occurred in this way. Yeah. I guess it's more the idea of, I thought that there would be a greater chance with this series, right? Not even necessarily winning. I did think they'd win it, but they didn't. It was more the idea of it'll at least be more competitive. The bottom won't fall out as frequently as it kind of did. And so I guess the denial for me right now is like, well, the Knicks can't be like, they couldn't have gone out like that, right? After this whole season, like in 5 games, and
to that team,
right? To the Hawks team, which again is well coached, but they're not this elite team that is out there. And this feeling of confidence from good vibes all around this whole season. And that's kind of what's shaking me the most, where I can't say that I can't say it would have gone out any other way when we look at the 5 games that are there, but to think like there are 5 games and these other opportunities that were there, and in each game they slipped away for one reason or another. And I can't really believe that it has happened that way.
It's interesting because I think my denial is tied into your denial, because I don't think, as much as we said going into the series, it's once they got the 4 seed, we were like, anything that happens is gravy, right? They got this fucking team got home court advantage in the playoffs. We said to ourselves, whatever happens is gravy, but that was denial. We didn't really believe that. We didn't really believe that, which is why now you're in denial about how they went out. I'm in denial about the fact that like some of the good ramifications of the year as a whole may now be on hold, as it were. And this is actually going to lead into the next stage of grief, which is anger. Quote unquote, why am I so sad?
Wait, but before we get there, I want to add one more thing about denial. I think another thing about denial is, for me, well, I'm trying to not get too much to another stage, right? But it's also like, I can't believe that the Knicks had to, like, with the team that they had in terms of injuries and COVID, getting there, but then when these players were healthy, how it didn't propel them even further. So I guess just to, but again, that part of that will go more a little bit later. That's it. Yeah.
I think it will too. What I was going to say is I'm in denial that we let that shitty little pissant, could someone put that on his Wikipedia page? I'm old. You're not, I mean, you remember, do you remember Reggie Miller?
Not as a player.
Okay. Andrew remembers him not as well as I do, because I remember I think I've written this or at least said this. My first memory of Reggie Miller was going to bed before the 4th quarter of Game 5 of the '94 Eastern Conference Finals, when the Knicks were up. I think they were up by 15 heading into the 4th quarter of that series. And then I woke up the next morning and my dad was like, yeah, they lost. Reggie Miller scored 25 points in the fourth quarter. And I was like, what? So yeah, that was my first introduction to Reggie Miller. I did not think it was possible to hate a player as much as I hated Reggie Miller. And that wasn't even the worst of it. It was the next year with the 8 points and 8.9 seconds. Anyway, the feelings that I have towards Trae Young after some of the shit he pulled. And the worst part of it is, and this is again, I'm in denial about this. The only way you feel that way about a player is if you know in your heart that they're really fucking good. And that it's just, I am in denial that guy, not, I'm not Giannis. Like if you lose to Giannis or Embiid or Durant or Jimmy Butler, like these are manly men, manly basketball players, Andrew shaking his head. Telling me to ease up. Trae Young is he's a slight little guy. I'm just saying it like it is. He's a little nothing. He's a little balding nothing. And he's afraid of birds. So, and that gets me to anger. I am very angry that Trae Young beat us. And I just really don't like it. I'm not happy. I was in the Garden last night and when he fucking bowed, he had the gall to bow. Come on, man. What the F? So yeah.
Now we're censoring ourselves. All right. Good to know. I think my anger definitely is Trae Young related for sure. A lot of it, and this is not to say the reason why the Knicks lost by any means, but with the refs, like for last night's game, for example, when Trae Young draws these absurd fouls and then Julius Randle does the same thing and gets called for the offensive foul, it's infuriating. Or how, one play that Randle has that it really, to me, didn't look like a flagrant foul, and it turned out it wasn't. But then Taj Gibson stopping DeAndre Hunter from trying to go up for a dunk is ruled as a flagrant foul. And the calls are all over the place. Game one, everything seemed great. It seemed like the trend for the series would be this will be clean, or at least in the sense of like not so much the action, but the play calling or the ref calling. Like we're going to try to make this feel like it's playoff intensity. There's not going to be a lot of ticky-tack stuff. And then the fourth quarter came on and all hell broke loose. It was like the dam flooded So I think a lot of my anger stems from that. But yes, it stems from Trae Young being able to hush everyone on the court, telling everyone to shut up and essentially him having that type of control. But, it's also just like other guys being in the right place at the right time. Coincidentally, that Bogdanovich 3 that was infuriating, or a lot of the, I guess here's the thing. The Hawks were favored going into the series, even though the Knicks were the 4th seed. And so the idea of all these players talking smack, which granted backed up, don't get me wrong, but they also talked when they were ahead. I saw some quote about how Michael Jordan used to say it's one thing to talk when you're ahead, but when you're behind or in lockstep, like tied with someone, then it's a slightly different thing. So, my anger is more, yes, it is at Atlanta, but I think it's the fact that there was so much crying going on from the Hawks' perspective from the beginning of the series, even before it started. This idea that really gets under your skin. It does, in the sense that it's just saying things for no reason, right? Because it's all about controlling a narrative. If you're Nate McMillan, it's a win-win for you, right? You say, oh, well, the NBA wants the Knicks to prosper and to thrive.
It's the best $25,000 you ever spent.
Right, exactly. Because basically what you're saying is, hey, the refs are trying to sway the Knicks in one direction because the NBA wants them. And if that's true, then that's just a terrible look for everyone. And it's like, look at what the Knicks are doing. They're getting all the favorable calls. And if it's not true, they can still pretend that it is and go on and be like, look, like we're fighting for our lives here. So it's the perfect excuse if they don't win, but they wound up winning. So, I think there's anger for the Hawks for sure, but it's also like very much ref focused. And again, I'm not saying the refs are the reason why the Knicks went one way or another. It's just ways that it was called. It just seemed like it was very lopsided. And I'm not talking about the one game in Atlanta where the Knicks had, a tremendous amount of free throws to Atlanta's very few. I understand that was seriously in favoring the Knicks, but through the course of the series, Trae initiates contact and looks like a rag doll. And we know that he's not. You say he's a small guy. He absolutely is, but he sells it in a way where he uses it to his advantage. And I would like the NBA to look at it completely in terms of how a player like him draws fouls, because it just like, even Steve Nash said it, and he's someone who understands, like, it doesn't feel like basketball. He gets away with it. And that's fine, because those are the parameters of the rules. You could say, don't hate the player, hate the game. I'm not hating the player. I'm hating the game because of the fact that I think that the way that you are able to draw contact, like basically using your head to punch Reggie Bullock in the chin, and you get 3 free throws out of that, that to me does not feel like a basketball play. When you are initiating the contact, if the NBA has ruled that you can't put your leg out to draw contact and basically get 3 shots or 2 shots in this case out of it, then why is this any different? So I think it's a more macro problem.
No, but
in terms of my anger, but it feeds into the micro stuff.
No, but I think it is micro, and the reason it's micro is because, to me, and maybe this is just me being a sore loser because this is the guy we just lost to. But in my defense, I've always been a James Harden supporter, and anyone go back through my social media and just look, like I have an immense amount of respect for the guy. I've said I think he's one of the top 10 offensive players of all time. I thought he deserves all of his NBA MVP like vote tallies. When he gets those calls and he goes to the line, I feel like it's because there is a part of that you cannot stop him unless you foul him because of the things that he is able to do. He forces people's hands. Does he initiate some of that contact? 1,000% he initiates some of that contact. But there is a sense that, like, if you don't do that stuff, he's just going to go off for whatever he goes off for, 40 points every time, because he's deadly with the step back. And he is just an absolute magician, a master craftsman, so to speak, when he gets into the lane. Don't get me wrong. Trae Young has some nice handles, some really nice handles. But what he's doing, to me, goes to a different level of using the refereeing to and bringing it to a place it's not supposed to go. And I don't know where that line is. I'm not even saying it's a fine line. It's probably like a hazy fog between the Harden and like the Young, but I know Young's on the wrong side of it. That's what I'm damn sure of. And
Luke is similar to Harden too, in the sense of it's just like big, strong guys who can get to the rim, and you have to wrap them up. Right.
Yes.
With Trae, it's just like, look how small he is. Of course you're drawing that contact. Like, he's going to get, it's almost like, and I say this as an only child, but it feels like the little brother idea, where it's like anything that you do, if the little brother gets hurt in any way, it's how could you do this? Whereas if the little brother hurts you, it's like, well, like, you're the bigger brother, you're supposed to take it.
But and there's another part to this, and I don't want to go off on it. Back in my day when basketball was great, tangent, although I guess I'm about to, like, Isaiah Thomas, the original Isaiah Thomas, and actually the more recent Isaiah Thomas. I mean, look at where his career ended up because of some physical maladies. But hold it with the original Isaiah Thomas. He got the shit kicked out of him by the Celtics, by the Bulls. There's a reason the man essentially retired from basketball after a little bit more than a decade. He won 2 championships. And he did it because he took the pounding, and he came back, he got up, and he would, he famously, had one of the best quarters in NBA history on like one leg. That's Isaiah Thomas. Take it through the 90s. There's a ton more examples where that came from. Like with this shit, it's like you're not allowed to, obviously you're not allowed to play that way anymore. But again, with Harden, like, you could beat Harden up and he has to get back up and like take it. Like Chris Paul's gotten beat up over the course of his career. And the Trae Young stuff is just like, I don't know. I'm sure Atlanta fans love watching him more than anything, and good for them. Nobody gives a shit about Atlanta, so it's nice that they have a team in the second round. But yeah, it makes me angry as well. So good transition to bargaining.
There's so many good ones.
Yeah, there is. Can I? I'll start with one of mine because I have 2 big ones, and I'll start with one, and then I'll go to you. Oh gosh, which one do I want to start with first? No, I'm going to start with the one that hits closest to my heart. You guys know, I have an issue with ever thinking that an authority figure is wrong. For anybody who's listened to this podcast for some time, I had many takes defending David Fizdale. They were bad takes. It was just awful. Go back and listen to some of those early pods talking about, oh, he's instilling culture. He's got an axe. An axe. What's more culture than an axe? And I just, I think when someone has earned the job of like head coach in the NBA, it's because they are holier than thou and that they do no wrong. And Tom Thibodeau this year, again, I have been the captain of his bandwagon. I've been consistent with that. I would go on live streams when people would yell and scream and this and that about Elfrid Payton or rotation decisions or minutes or this, that, and the other thing. And I would say, listen, what do you want? Do you want one of the head coaches that have come through here for the last 20 years and that to be your lot in life? No. This is our guy. You should be appreciative of him. How dare you speak ill of a single thing he does? And now I have to wrestle with what we just saw over the last 5 games. And in terms of like the bargaining that's going on in my head, there is a part of me that's like, I know the talent on this roster. It is not anywhere near the talent that Atlanta has. How could anyone have the gall to criticize him for just not being able to continue to make, chicken salad out of chicken shit? And then there's the other part of me who watched, again, I didn't do it for game 5, but for game 4, watched every Knicks shooting possession with Trae Young in the game. And how many times did they put him in the action? About like 12% of the time, whatever, 13, 14%, like some obscenely minimal figure. And now they're done in 5 games. And they never once pressed the issue. And I don't, there is no easy answer for that. So that's my bargaining. That's the first bit of bargaining I'm doing. What bargaining are you doing, Jeremy?
I guess I'll start with, what if Julius Randle looks like the Julius Randle we saw? Just in the sense of, he carried this team.
That's my other one, by the way.
What happens if Julius Randle decides to actually look like the player that he was, the most improved player? Where is all this coming from? Why is this happening? What happens if he's able to figure it out and give the Knicks a chance, a puncher's chance, to the point where things seem pretty good, where maybe the Knicks win, one of those 2 games in not so much Atlanta, or I guess, what if they win, 2 of the 4, right? And then we're looking at a situation where, sure, the Knicks are down 3-2 or something going to Atlanta, but they still have a chance. They're still in the series, that sort of thing. And it's disappointing, obviously, that it didn't happen that way. But just wondering, why and where the Monstars took all of his power. And it sucks. Or another one for me is, what if Mitchell Robinson isn't hurt? Or even better, what if Mitchell Robinson gets hurt before the trade deadline and not 2 games after it?
Are you about to have an Andre Drummond take? Because I'm not sure.
I'm not about to have an Andre Drummond.
Thank you.
No, it's the thought process of, the Knicks went into the trade deadline thinking, well, we just got Mitchell Robinson back, right?
Yes.
If Mitchell Robinson gets hurt again before the deadline, do they think, well, this is a team that's kind of at a crossroads. They are good enough to make this run.
I see what you're saying. They also are not
necessarily talented enough. And do we consider selling off some of the more ancillary pieces, going in on development? Yeah, again, I don't think there's a right or wrong way of doing it. And I agree. I like the path that they have taken. It's just this idea of, they thought Mitchell Robinson was going to be healthy, and he simply wasn't. And it came, unfortunately, at a time after they were able to really make any significant decisions.
It's funny you say that, because I think the should we have tanked this season? I think we could categorize those as the tinfoil hat people. I think the folks who were like, we should have upgraded more at the deadline have a little bit more validity. Although I see, to me, that's one area that I'm not like, I'm not going through any of that on. I'm happy with what they did, and I'm happy with what they didn't do, because I do. Well, we're not at acceptance yet, but I do think the 4th seed was important, despite how they went out. So would they have gotten the 4th seed had they sold off parts? Probably almost certainly not. Right. But who knows? That's an uncertainty. I want to go back to Randall for a second. My bargaining with him is different because I find myself wonder, like, the bargaining I'm doing in my head is more like, are all the people that are saying that, like, this is what he is. Like, I know that's not true. But at the same time, we all saw what we saw, and the numbers are what they are. I mean, his effective field goal percentage for this series was like under 40, right?
Yeah.
Can a guy be like, how do you go from that confident and like in control of everything? Even when he was slumping down the end of the season, didn't it still feel like he was still in control?
Yeah.
Of the game? Like, it still felt like he was like owning those games, even when he wasn't shooting well. And then to come in here and look like a completely different player, I'm like, what does that mean? So I don't know if that's bargaining, but I'm sitting here and I'm asking myself that question, and I don't know what the answer is.
I think I'll save my thoughts on that for the next phase. But yeah, I think the idea of the Knicks upgrading at the deadline, it's like, well, who really would it have been, right? Because a lot of people wanted Evan Fournier. Fournier is a really good talent, but he's proven time and time again that he is very good in the regular season and then shrinks in a lot of ways towards the playoffs. And you're dealing with a similar issue in Reggie Bullock. You need that star wing or someone who's like, capable of playing at a greater point. And Fournier's defense also, like, if they stuck Reggie Bullock on Trae Young a lot, Fournier is not going to do anything to help. Well, what is really going to advance? At the end of the day, it's, then it's the other thought of like, well, what if the Knicks had done more to upgrade at the lead ball handler position, right? What if instead of going after someone like Elfrid Payton, they instead traded for someone else, right? That sort of mindset. Because, I mean, we know that they traded for Rose, and we know that paid off down the line.
Who, how, when, where, why? We know the why. But we can ask. All the other questions, I think, are uncertainties. Yeah. And like, I mean, they did trade for Rose, and Rose was, I mean, essentially he played the minutes of a starting point guard down the stretch, and he was effective as a quasi starting point guard down the stretch. Yeah, I don't. And what realistic option was there available that would have gotten them higher than where they got, and that would have made the difference in a series like this? I'm not sure I see the answer. And I also think. Yeah, what were you going to say? No,
I was going to say, I mean, this sort of goes into the what if category while we're on it. But, I've been reflecting. I didn't try to do too much because I wanted to save it for what we were doing. But I couldn't help but feel like, looking back, one of the turning points, I don't think I really realized at the time, is like the Lakers game kind of felt like, it just felt like there was a shift in momentum. And it kind of reverberated through the rest of the season. Like, if you think about it, the Knicks had opportunities to win that game, and
that's not crazy.
Something about that box out that just kind of like, it felt like there was an off switch, right? The Knicks did not do well in overtime. And this was a game after they beat the Clippers, which I think was their best win of the season.
It was unequivocally the high point of the season.
Right. And things just kind of crumble from there. You get 3 home games, and each one of them feels like some sort of dud in some way, right? I mean, the Spurs game,
the Spurs game was the most undud-like because they were down and then came back from being down, but they did go way down. They were down
by so much. It was,
at home against
16-17?
A team that was not good. And when they came back in that game, and when they came back from 17 down, the Spurs couldn't do a blessed thing on offense. And the defense played well, but that was a Spurs loss, I think, as much or more than a Spurs win. And I completely agree with you about the Hornets game and the Celtics game. Those games were utterly dreadful.
And then you get a week off, and you get Randall, who has said in the past that he is not good with these long layoffs. And then he's in his own head. And before you know it, it's like, okay, well, that's a stretch of 8 games and an overtime, or an extra overtime, because the Hornets game went to overtime. It's like, that is the sample size we're dealing with. And if you look at prior to that, the Knicks were rolling, even in the games that they were getting blown out of in Denver and in Phoenix. With the Phoenix game, it was close for 3 quarters. And then that was a meltdown at the end of the third quarter. So I don't know. It's just maybe looking back, something kind of that there should have been warning signs about this, and we just ignored them because we thought, oh, those are just tough breaks, and it turned out to be a greater issue than maybe we had considered.
I'll save my thoughts on that for when we get to acceptance, in terms of the warning signs about what this team was and what this team wasn't. Moving on to depression, this one, I mean, okay, so I was thinking about that. I was talking about this with Dolores on our walk before, as we are wont to do. And I said to her, and I don't think it's an overstatement, I don't remember the last time that I have felt watching a basketball game in person or at home like I felt during the third quarter of Game 5. Because look, as Knicks fans, we have watched some shitty basketball over the years. It has been very bad. It's been atrocious at times. But here's the thing about when it was atrocious. You knew you were watching an atrocious team. It was like, because you had watched the previous game and the game before that and the game before that. So when the atrocities were rolled out, there was no surprise to the atrocities. Now, fast forward to this year. Have we seen some rough moments of basketball this year? Absolutely. It's actually rare was the Knicks game where there wasn't a 5 to 10 minute stretch where they looked pretty inept on offense, where they just like couldn't put the ball in the hole and they weren't really moving it that well. I guess maybe from almost the beginning, like maybe a minute or two into the third quarter of Game 5 until when Quickly checked in. So a nice solid 10-minute stretch of game time. That's the worst thing I've seen this year. And because of what the expectations were versus years past, I can't remember the last time I have felt as despondent watching a stretch of basketball as I was. It got to the point after, just let me say this, and then I want to get your take on this, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. It was maybe 7 minutes or so left in the quarter, and they had been kicking the ball around, and like it clearly was not going well. And I was at the game with my brother, and I turned to him like, they need to take all these guys out. Like they just need to do a hockey lineup or something to that effect, because this is. Like, it was clear that the talk about the Monstars, I don't know what happened at halftime, whatever. There was nothing there. And it kept going, another possession and then another possession, another possession. And give them credit, they were fighting on defense. But my God, the offensive possessions were getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then by the time Quickly came in, I think it was a 16-point lead. And then, you kind of knew at that point that that was that. Can you compare that to anything? I'm curious.
I don't know if I can really. I mean, unless it's like some sort of meltdown that one of my teams has faced in the past, and it's happened. It was a meltdown in the playoffs. It
was a meltdown,
right? And it was this hollow feeling, right? Of like, I could deal with the series loss, but in this manner, like this, everything about it, and. I think the depression also stems because it's like, well, yes, we can toast to the season and what's great. But again, it's like going back to the what ifs with Randall. What happens if a lot of this was a 1 year inflated thing? Like, I don't expect him to maintain a lot of the levels that he did. I think he will improve as a player for his all around game because he continues to do it. So many of us wanted him gone after last season, and he shut all of us up. And so many people are now not interested in keeping him long term. And you'd think that people would have learned their lesson by now, that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to count someone out quite yet. And this person served in a role where ideally, for an entire season, he was playing with two non-shooters, a 20-year-old and a player in Reggie Bullock, who really would be off of the bench anywhere else, probably. At least
he's a seventh man.
Right. And there's no shame in that whatsoever. But he's carrying that load, but it seemed disappointing to then see him be lazy with certain closeouts and get out of his own head and all of that. And it's like, if you consider yourself to be the leader or a leader, a prominent one at that, you have to be more disciplined. You can't let your emotions be quite that transparent, because it's going to set some sort of tone. like in a lot of ways, it felt like RJ after the game was taking this more in stride than Randall did. And I get it. I feel for Randall. I really do, because of the fact that he has, he took this whole season on his shoulders, and he was wearing, he was getting the praise, and now he's wearing the blame. And I think, like a good leader, that's what you should be. You shouldn't take the pride when things are going well, and then, try to figure out how you can get all of the negativity off of you and on to others. You win as a team, you lose as a team, but you also look inward. And I do think Randall still was able to do that. It's just the other things clouded his judgment. And what depresses me, quote unquote, to this point is, like, again, you can cut ties with Randall after next season if you're not going to re-sign him. But what happens if this is felt more like a flash in the pan? Because for a lot of these other teams, like, again, as I've said, the Knicks are ahead of the teams in the bigger markets, at least New York and LA, in terms of where they've been in their rebuilds at the point where before they got their stars. But if the Knicks do poorly next season, does all of this just feel like the equivalent of a bubble in how we're viewing the Miami Heat? Are we looking at this as a way of like, well, they're good, but they still need more, and who's really going to be the one or multiple ones to really come in and try to revive this? Because again, no one really wants to be the savior who's worth saving the franchise as a number one option. And it's just all of this negativity that then feeds in. What happens if you don't do well? Like, there's so much room to grow between now and the 2022 offseason. And then things get a little bit more cramped, but the door doesn't shut. It's closer. It's a little bit closer. And what happens if things get too close for comfort? And a lot of this is out of our control. We as fans can't control any of this. So how do we accept what we're seeing and feel comfortable enough that if things go awry, how does this entire beautiful open window then stay open and not feel like it's shutting before our very eyes?
Now you're talking macro. I want to go back to the micro on Julius first. No, but because they're intimately tied in.
They are.
There is now a mental toughness question that did not exist before. If anything, I think Randall proved more than anything that he was a mentally tough player this year, because this year came after last year. And if you didn't get shook after last year and you were able to come back and do this, I mean, what more can you say about the guy? But that question now exists. And then there's just obviously what is Julius Randle if he is a 8% worse shooter on long twos, and he's a 5% worse shooter on threes? And if the finishing that was a strength in his career 2 and 3 and 4 years ago is now going to continue to go on the downside, because now we have 2 straight years. It's the elephant in the room this year. Finishing was not great last year. We blamed it on the spacing. Fast forward to this year, spacing still wasn't great, but finishing wasn't great. It was just as bad as last year. So, and the guy that has been referenced in conversation with the turnaround Julius has had, and I don't want to bring him up because it's going to only make me more depressed, but we're all friends here. Safe space, is Victor Oladipo. And I'm not talking about post-injury Victor Oladipo. I don't care about that version. I'm talking about the Victor Oladipo that came back the year after he finished, was it 7th in the MVP voting, which is probably right about what Julius Randle is going to finish. 3rd team All NBA. He should have been 2nd team, which is, again, probably where Julius is going to finish. He came back the year after that season. His field goal percentage went from 47.7 to 42.3. 3-point percentage went from 37.1 to 34.3. Scoring average dropped by a little bit more than 4 points. His steals went down by about a third. He was a different, like, he didn't have it anymore. And then the injury happened. Now, in that season, guess what? Victor Oladipo still made the All-Star team, even with those subdued numbers. So, like, how crazy would it be if Julius Randle comes back next year, is still good, like, it's like okay, but like much worse, and like still makes the All-Star team, and like now you have like a two-time. Again, we're getting so far ahead of ourselves, and I don't want to do it, but at the same time, these are now the places that our minds will go to because of what we just saw. the other, and this is the last thing I'll say on Randall, the other part of the bargaining is that there has to be another side of it. So the other side of it to me, and that I think I'm going to fall back on this offseason. As you said, the gap between him and the second best player on this team is as large or larger than the gap between any top two players in the league. And that is not to disparage what RJ Barrett is going to become. It is merely talking about what RJ Barrett is. And that is a very, very nice player, but compare him to all the other second bananas, and it's not really a conversation.
Those playoff teams, mind you.
Yes. Playoff teams. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. So what does Randall look like when you get him another guy? And who knows? Maybe RJ Barrett comes back next season and he is that other guy, right? But then you go back to the other part of the bargaining and be like, well, Derrick Rose looked pretty damn good for a couple of those playoff games, and it didn't seem to make a difference to Randall. So it's like you go back and forth here, and you just wish you didn't have to do this. And that's where we're at with Mr. Randall. Anything else before we move on to the last stage of grief?
But just one more thing on Randall. I know we've talked about this.
No, listen, he's
continuously.
But is anything else close to that big of a, like, let's call a spade a spade. He is the conversation topic now.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's things you maybe preferred to see in RJ. He was so good from deep and just wasn't working out that way. But I can't, the difference between RJ and Randall is that when RJ struggles, it's okay. Well, that's a 20-year-old who you can still build around him very easily because of his contract. Yep. When you look at Randall, it's, well, what does this mean now? And again, it goes back to this thing of, if you feel like Randall is a second or third option on a contender, then you can afford to pay him to be a second or third option. You don't have to pay him like a first option, which is everything in terms of this contract, and how even if you signed him to this contract, which again, either he says, I don't want that because I want to bet on myself, and there's nothing you can do about it because that's the most that you can really offer him anyway, or he agrees to it. And then you have his contract on the books. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that as in, there are so many ways to work around his deal. If the whole philosophy is like, hey, let's get a star free agent, and oh no, we don't have enough money in 2022. So what are we going to do? You can very easily pull off a sign and trade. You can figure out a team that might want it. You could clear cap space that way if they're that desperate and if they have that type of money. You could do a 3-team sign and trade. Like, there are possibilities galore. Locking into a deal is not a death sentence that I think a lot of people might feel it is. But again, it's now this whole thought process too of, does this type of performance actually help the Knicks? Does it get them to consider, or does it get Randall to consider, I'm doing a great job, but what if, I guess here's the question, right? A year from now, is Julius Randle going to make at least $26 million in the following season? Is that a risk that Randle wants to take? Because he's already going to be making almost 22. It'll be a little over 21. So if you're Randle, you could lock into something and say, just in the off chance that I look good, I want to be here, right? I want this.
Yeah.
Let's take it. Let's build together. That's totally fine. You could do that. But at the same time, if you are very confident in yourself, and Randall has to be, all these guys are confident in themselves. They're NBA players.
Oh yeah, I'm sure Randall's confident.
Of course. So you can see then, generally why he could then say, well, no, I don't need that. I had a great season. The postseason was rough. It's a smaller sample size. I got the team to the playoffs in the first place. Like, I can bet on myself and come back because I want to keep pushing myself. And the fact that it's a contract year, maybe that gets him even more excited. And then, he doesn't have that security of, okay, I can play it safe. And then what does that mean for the team moving forward? All of these things that we can factor in. But I guess it's going to be a running theme until we decide, or we see if Randall signs or not. But the idea of him, being on the team moving forward, it just shouldn't be terrifying, even with this postseason. Because if you can get even better talent around him, you can figure it out. The question, of course, is what is that talent? How are you getting it? And how is it impacting your future plans?
The two things real quick for anybody who may have missed, like, we've talked about this a lot. But just to be very clear, when you're referring to the contract that he could sign, there is a maximum that Julius Randle could sign in terms of an extension this summer. It would put him at, I think, what did you say, the 38th highest paid player in the league?
It's probably going to be even lower on that list when other guys sign.
After guys sign extensions, it'll be in the very high 30s or mid 40s. That is the going rate for a second or third option on a really good team. You can always trade that contract. That is not an untradeable contract in this league. It is a contract that by and large you'll get good stuff for. The second thing I want to say is I think the Knicks, what this does, it puts them in a good position because now they could maybe not look like the hero, but they could look good by going to Julius and say, we know what just happened. We're still going to give you the most. We're going to still offer you the most we can offer you, even despite that, and put the ball in Julius's court. But for the Knicks to be able to look like, look, we want to continue building this here. And, might there be some queasy moments if, Julius considers like the full 4 year, like here's what I don't think is going to happen. I don't think he's going to sign a full 4 year extension this summer. We don't have to talk about like, well, what you don't think so either?
No, so for the article I wrote for the Strickland, I basically pointed out that you could, if Julius really wanted to bet on himself and figure out a way to help with the team in terms of flexibility, the best thing for him to do is to sign a 2-year contract. And then that lines him up with 2024, where he could get, that 35% max. Again, I'm not suggesting, number one, that he will get it, or number two, that he should get it if there are other things that come into play. It's more just like, if that is the time to do it, and if that's the cost of doing business as well, where you get Julius Randle on a great deal when you can put everyone in and then go above the salary cap to re-sign him, because again, it's not our money. Like, we're not the ones spending the money. As long as Knicks don't hard cap themselves, they would be fine dealing with Julius Randle's contract. It's just, that is kind of how you focus on the next couple of years, because that is the most important thing. Because by the time, like 2024 rolls around, the Knicks should be a contender. There is not a doubt in my mind that they should be. Will they? Who knows?
But when you say it's not our money, when you say it's not our money, the key there is that we're talking about once you go over the cap, how much you go over. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but like, the Sixers right now don't give a shit that Tobias Harris is making $40 million instead of $32 million because they're so far over the cap, it doesn't really matter. Does it impede their flexibility in certain ways? Yes. But for what Tobias Harris does for them, they're not going to care. Right. The Knicks, I think, would sign up for that being the case with Julius, except he's probably not going to be Tobias Harris on the totem pole because he's like their third best player and, well, whatever.
But even just speaking of the Sixers, look at what they did with Al Horford.
Yes.
That was one of the worst contracts in the NBA, and it cost them what? A protected first?
Yeah.
In the future and a second? You're telling me that Julius Randle is going to cost something?
And they got Danny Green out of it, who's actually a player that has been starting for them all year. Right.
So, Julius Randle on a bigger contract, and I'm not saying the max, right? I'm just focusing on the earlier parts of like figuring out from there. Like, yes, that is not this crippling decision that will screw over the Knicks for years to come and will rue the day that it ever happened. Like, there are ways to work around it. And when you have a surplus of assets, you can afford to do that if you absolutely had to, but they probably won't, because you don't have to play at some absurd level to just be traded for matching and matching salary and throw in some other assets, and you can work yourself into something that is of value for your own team.
And let's be very clear. This is how our minds work. I speak on behalf of you, Jeremy, because I know you very well. We're not discounting the possibility that Julius Randle may just very well continue to be a part of the foundation here, and that we're all going to look back on this playoff series and laugh someday as like, wow, remember when he shot the bed in that one series. That's what we hope for. I hope for it. I think you probably hope for it too, that he continues to get better and all wonderful things. But that may not happen, which is why, as I'm sure, Brock Aller and company will do, plan for all contingencies, which gets us to acceptance. I feel better than I did an hour ago. I have to say, this has been helpful.
Isn't this great?
It's fantastic. I'm going to go through the list of things that I have come to accept. I have come to accept the fact that this team was never a fourth seed in the sense of, if you've been watching the NBA for a long time and you're like, oh, team has home court advantage, they must be fill in the blank here, in terms of like, I'm not even saying words, but like your mental image of what the team is that is the fourth seed. And I want to make it very clear the reason I'm saying that. It is not to disparage the Knicks. It is to actually to compliment them. And here's why. We've seen teams who, I think, wasn't when Portland got swept out of the playoffs by the, oh goodness, was it the Pelicans a few years ago? The Anthony Davis Pelicans? Were they, I think they were a 4 seed. 3 seed. Look at Andrew Clay. Really, best producer. I was gonna do a little bit on Claudio, but I'll just say it now. He's best producer in the business.
Oh yeah.
They were a 3 seed. That was an embarrassment. Now, it was not indicative of their franchise. They came back. They had a very nice season last year. Who knows what's going to happen with the Denver series? The point is, there have been moments in NBA history where a top 4 seed got embarrassed, and it was embarrassing, and they should have been embarrassed by what happened. I say that I've accepted the fact that the Knicks were not a 4 seed because I do not think that they or we as fans should be embarrassed by what just happened. And I say that recognizing that is is it apologistic? Is that the word? I think I'm being an apologist.
Yeah.
Okay. Something like an apologist. I say that in full recognition of what I am doing here. But I also genuinely feel it in my bones. And if you're ranking the top teams in the NBA in terms of like, put this team in a playoff series with a decent coach, with like a commensurate, like top 10 NBA team, like where are they going to, like, the Knicks are probably not in the top 10 of that group. I think the top 10 of that group is probably the top 3 in the East, the Hawks, and maybe how many teams out West? Is it 6 teams out West? Is it 7 teams out West? Somewhere in the vicinity. You want to be mad at me because you'll be like, wait, you're saying the Knicks are worse than Dallas? Yes, I'm saying the Knicks are worse than Dallas. And that's because I'm watching a kid over in fucking Dallas do things that you're not supposed to be able to do on a basketball court. But I digress. The point is,
that's Porzingis, of course.
Of course, it's obviously who Timmy Hardaway. Porzingis. That's who I was thinking of. Tim Hardaway Jr. No, I was really thinking of Jalen Brunson. Come home, Jalen. Future Nick, Jalen Brunson. Oh man, that'd be nice. Okay, I'm not going to distract myself. So I've accepted what the Knicks are, and in that acceptance, I think I personally can go into this offseason, despite the things that we have spoken about on this podcast, questions about Thibodeau, questions about Randall, all of those sorts of things. I could go into this offseason feeling really good, because it means that what just happened putting Randall aside, because again, that's kind of its own conversation, but like what just happened over the last 5 games should not in any way diminish. And I know many have said this, but I want to be very specific about like why I'm saying it and where I'm coming from. Should not diminish what was accomplished in the previous 72. And just the fact that the only, and I just want to make sure this is crystal clear, the only reason we are going through 5 stages of grief on this episode is because this team so vastly exceeded every reasonable expectation that could have possibly been put forth for them before the season started. And that is why we are sitting here and doing this. And that should not be counted as a demerit against them. That should be counted as a positive. And so I am accepting the fact that this season was nothing but a success. And I just, is it a little bit of lipstick on a pig? Maybe. But I just, in the NBA, it comes down to talent. This team didn't have enough of it. It sucks that they didn't, but it is what it is. And that's where we're at. So, Mr. Cohen, I turn to you.
Yeah, that was very well said. I accept the fact that a team on a shoestring budget with several role players and someone that, again, fans wanted to kick out well before the season, myself included, that the Knicks were able to use all of that to their advantage and make this incredible run in a season where we were expecting them to be, maybe a bottom 10 team, potentially even worse than that. And they were able to say, no, we're going to be far better than that. We're going to get to the playoffs. We're going to get home court advantage. And sure, the Knicks were exposed at the next level.
Yeah.
It turns out that having star power is probably going to take you pretty far. And it did. At least in this case, it took the Hawks further. And it still is. But, the idea of how we can hang our heads high, and I don't want to turn this into this whole, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened sort of thing, because it is still upsetting. I'm still going to walk away numb from this, but I feel better about the fact that the Knicks were able to, again, take bare bones situations, not make big upgrades, and still get blood from a stone, so to speak. And you can take pride in that too. I think that this season as well, it was more personal for me. Just because of everything going on and the ability to sit down and watch a team that I know has a decent chance. And well, wouldn't you know, they've won 9 games in a row right now. And 12 out of 13, and giving me joy, extreme joy at a time where again, so much is just crap. And I accept the fact as well that, me, I pour into these future scenarios of what could happen. And obviously some are outlandish, some are certainly more realistic, but
there's nothing outlandish about anything you've ever said on this podcast. I just want that to be noted for the record.
Let's just ignore everything in the wake of the Leon Rose hire that never happened. Anyways, the idea now that we can go into this offseason or even next offseason and be like, you can dream big. Dreaming big isn't something that is now preposterous, because we're seeing the Knicks get to a point where they could do big things. Like, yeah, if you like Lonzo Ball and you think that the Knicks should sign him, that's great. You're free to feel that. I'm happy for you.
Your co-host might feel that way.
Well, we'll have that conversation another time.
Listen, we're going to have a lot of fun off-season conversations.
Oh, yes, we will. But, again, this idea of you don't have to settle. You don't have to say Lonzo Ball's great. And I don't know. I don't want to lose out on a star talent, or at least, have no shot. And then I've lost out on Lonzo Ball. You don't have to go through that philosophy. And a big reason for that is because of the Knicks winning, that atmosphere. Again, we can speak personally to how loud that place was, how exciting it was. And when I see tweets about it's just an overrated building, it's not. No. You can tell who has not been to a playoff game by how they tweet about the Knicks. It's very obvious. And, players are going to see that. Players are going to feel that even through the television. They're going to learn about it.
Derrick Rose said that last night.
Right.
He said I've heard players talk about how much they want to come play here now.
Right. And, this is why Leon Rose and Worldwide Wes are here. It is to basically, the work starts now in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously it started beforehand, but the whole thing of if your whole thing is also to eventually the end game being acquire stars, this is your window. You're doing a great job so far, 100%. But, it's one thing to go from mediocre and a laughing stock to a good team. It's getting from, good to great or great to elite. Mm-hmm. That's that range. And they haven't gotten there yet. And I'm not holding it against them by any means. They just, time hasn't gotten there yet. But
it doesn't sound like you were.
Right. But that, this is where it starts. You've taken the next step up. You have to build from here. We could talk about expectations. It'd be pointless because of the fact that we don't even know who's going to be on the team. But this idea of, I think the one thing I'll say is, again, if you match what we saw in any capacity and just look a little bit better as well during the regular season and more consistent, especially on offense, you can sell yourself a lot better. You don't have to, go to the next round for it to feel like it's validated. And again, this could change. This is all subject to change. But my gut feeling right now is, as long as you show consistency, you're on the right track. And players are going to say, wow, that one season during COVID, where there were 2,000 fans in the building for a long time of the season, some stadiums didn't even have fans. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just that year. This is legit. This is real. And I'm more interested in being a part of something real. And there's someone else who's also really interested in that. And together with this team, we can create something beautiful. And I accept the fact that this season is a huge, step in the right direction for all of that happening.
That was beautiful, Jeremy. Thank you for that. Very well said. I have nothing else to add, other than to say, on a different note, I think part of why the season was so disappointing, the end of the season was so disappointing, is because, and I speak on behalf of Jeremy and Andrew when I say this, we've gotten so many messages and people reaching out to us, saying how special the season was, in part because of like what we do here at Knicks Film School. And when that's happening and you're kind of part of it, for it to, and not to say for it to end because like you don't like that people are not going to say nice things about you anymore. It's just more the fact that, this was a thing that made people happy this season, and when things make us happy, it feels like they deserve a certain ending, right? Not to get too like, I don't get too, but like, when someone is taken from you very quickly or something unexpectedly, like there's a reason why that's really hard. And look, say what you want about how silly it is or is not, but sports are like, we love this shit. There's a reason we get on here and we spend hours of our week talking about this basketball team. It is in a perverted sense, it is a form of love. So for it to end like it did, like that's why it's hard. But just to anybody who's reached out to any of us, if we haven't gotten back to you directly or expressed our gratitude for your sentiments, I'll say right now, thank you. And also thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Andrew. It just absolute Jeremy. I don't know how you do it every week. You come on here and you deal with my nonsense.
Me?
No, seriously.
You're the one grinding.
No, man, it's like because here's the thing. I really, when we do these back and forths, it's like, you don't know what I'm going to say because we don't tell each other what we're going to say. So it's like, I could have said the thing that you were planning on talking about, and you just have to fucking react and think of something else on the fly. Yep. And you're great at it, and you and that's why it's awesome. And Andrew Claudio, I've ever run out of words to talk about Andrew Claudio. But I will ask him if he has any words to share before we get the hell out of here.
For most of my life, Atlanta has caused me a lot of pain, whether it be the Atlanta Braves, who were my nemesis growing up, and then you add now Trae Young to the mix, and how, somebody who grew up on 90s hip hop and New York dominated that scene, and then Atlanta showed up and now they're the center of the hip hop world. You mentioned we did this fun bit of going through the 5 stages of grief, and I just saw the Disney movie Cruella, the spin on Cruella de Vil, if you will, John. And apparently there's a 6th stage called Revenge. And I'm very much looking forward to getting revenge on Atlanta in the not too distant future. Leon, get it done.
Can I tell you a thought that I had? I'm not advocating like giving up like a real asset or assets for this player, but I was listening to what was it, the Russillo Simmons KFC Jackie
the
McMullen
Boston Summit,
emergency pod, and they were talking about how they were probably going to trade like Marcus Smart. It wouldn't surprise anybody if they traded him this summer. And just thinking to myself, like, well, there's a guy who would make Trae Young's life probably a little bit more interesting.
Yes, not to do a full Philly, and how like they lost to Giannis, or they went and got Al Horford solely to go get Giannis. Yeah, like, I don't want to base the whole off season.
No, that's ridiculous.
But I like where you're thinking, because enemy number one, like, people want to say that there's a Knicks-Nets rivalry. The Nets are so much farther away. I don't care about
this is
that team.
No, It's a rivalry. Yeah. But the thing I do, because for anybody who's going to jump and yell and scream at the thought of like going to get a defender, as I have been saying for the last week and a half, the Knicks didn't lose the series because of defense.
Oh yeah,
they lost it because they couldn't score the fucking ball.
Although they could use a point of attack defender and Mitchell Robinson. Yes. But yes,
well they benched their best point of attack offender, guys. What are you talking? I'm glad we haven't said his name the whole podcast.
I was going to say I'm sorry, Andrew. We've run out of time for this. I don't have an image.
I will just end on this. To get somewhat real, I said this on my half of the post game last night. Like, Jon just mentioned it about sports and how important they can be and how much of a nice distraction they can be. It's nice to have somebody to hate in a playoff sense again. Like, in a way, actually feeling a hatred toward a player because we're now rivals in a playoff series is not something I, as a Knicks fan, have felt since the 90s, since Reggie Miller, since Alonzo Mourning, since Tim Hardaway, senior, that would be. And it's my biggest takeaway of this season. And like, even more on a personal note, like, I've known Jeremy for close to 5 years now, 4 or 5 years now. And Jon a little bit less than that. And this is easily the most fun I've had watching sports. This is easily the most success I've had working on anything involving sports. And, as Jon said, any thanks you give us, we extend it right back, because this has been an incredible ride, and thank you for coming along with us.
All that being said, don't worry, we're not taking a break or anything. We're going to keep giving you Knicks content. We got a lot of stuff coming up. We've already talked about some stuff we're going to do for the off season and then the extended summer and whatnot. One step at a time, though. We will take this one in stride, and we will be back very soon. So, on behalf of Mr. Jeremy Cohen and Mr. Andrew Claudio, thank you for listening to yet another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We will be back with you with more delicious content, going through different stages of some other emotion before you know it.